How's it going, everyone? Eulero Gonzalez again here, and in today we're gonna see is how can we integrate now Redux toolkit into Next.js. So as a way to now fetch dynamic data from an API, because right now all of this has been written in React using Next, but all of this is static. So the idea of today's video is to pull dynamic data from these APIs, right? Which is part of this particularly test API where we can fetch data from patients. So this is the endpoint. This is the methods that we're gonna use, and this is how we need to make our requests, okay? As well as the response or example response from that. So underneath the hood, we already set everything that our components can be consume all of this data. So let's go to now do some data transformation as a way to, once we make that request, we can pass down that data. But first, we need to look at how can we use Redux here with Next. Okay, it explains you now is you have to get familiar with EX6 2015 or EX6, EX7 syntax and features, GSX, which is the markdown that allows us to write JavaScript in HTML. What are states on the life cycle of in the React states, the functional components approach, as well as hooks, Redux terms and concepts. So you have to get yourself familiar with what is in a store, what is in a slice, what is the reason of why we need to actually have Redux as a way to have this central or this centralized store of data, not to work with UI states, but for app level data. And well, some documentations and how you should start to work with TypeScript as it is. So next is this popular server-side rendering frameworks for React that present some unique challenge for using Redux properly. These challenges include per request safe Redux store creation, because at the end of the day, the problems that Next.js wants to solve is multiple renderings. Okay, we have client-side rendering, server-side rendering, and now we introduce things like stale-well revalidate. So because here now they make use of this experimental feature called React server components, which is so these components are stateful, which means that you don't hold any JavaScript logic there. As a way to now improve is caching, so you don't have to, anytime that component change, you have to generate a new cache version for that. So you just only have one, since that component you know that it won't change. So this is why they talk about here the per request say Redux store creation. A Next server can handle multiple requests simultaneously. This means that the Redux store should be created per request. Interesting. And that the store should not be shared across requests. Okay, interesting. Again, this is the particular approach with server-side rendering. Server-side rendering friendly store height rotation. Next.js applications are rendering twice. First on the server and again on the client. Failure to render the same page content on both the client and the server will result in a hydratation error. Interesting. It's because traditionally when we are doing this kind of client-side rendering or server-side rendering, we just only let the server, in the case of client-side rendering, let the server to send us the basic HTML, show something to the user while we are hurrying up everything in the background to make it interactive once the full JavaScript bundle has been downloaded. So Redux store will have to be initialized on the server and then reinitialized on the client with the same data in order to avoid hydratation issues. Okay, is this actually something performant? Again, because remember that Next is this server-side rendering application that then would provide you all of these optimizations out of the box, and then you can now fine-tune is as you need to. Let's say, hey, I just want to make these particular components to render on the client side. In other words, to access to the web APIs. Okay, so SPA routing support. Next.js support and hybrid model for client-side routing. A customer first page load will get an server-side rendering result from the server. A customer first page load will get a server-side result from the server. Subsequent page navigation will be handled by the client. Okay. The first time the customer first page load, it'll be rendered on the server as it is, and then the subsequent page navigation will be handled by the client. This means that with a singleton store defined in the layer, route specific data will need to be selectively reset on route navigation, while non-route specific data will need to retain in the store. And then the server caching friendly. Recent version of Next.js, specifically applications using the app router architecture, which is exactly what we are, that this hospital app is using, support aggressive server caching. The ideal store architecture should be compatible with this caching. So there are two architectures for Next application. The page router, something that you can have this legacy thing, okay, and the app router, which make much more easy when it comes to delegate, let the routing mechanism be handled by Next. The page router is the original architecture for Next.js. Exactly. If you're using the page router, Redux setup is primarily handled by using the Next Redux wrapper library, which integrates a Redux store with page router data fetching method like get server side props. But this is in the older models, or in the older architecture, the page router. But now with the app router, things are quite different. This guy will focus on the app router architecture, as it is the new default architecture option for Next.js. Let's get into it. How to read this guy. This page assumes that you already have an existing Next application based on the app router architecture. There you got it, like this. If you want to follow along, you can create a new empty Next project with npm create. No need to do this. The default prompt will set up a new project with the app router enabled. Then add Redux Toolkit and React Redux as dependency. You can also create a new Next Redux project with this, and then you okay, with Redux my app, which is include the initial set of pieces describing in this page. Let me run this to see how it will look like. Let me run this in a different place. Okay. Yeah, let me look. Yeah. Please be my guest. All right. So right now what I'm doing is to take a look at this, installing this test. Okay. And then go into that and say cd my app. Perhaps you're not able to see what I'm doing. It's too small here. Okay. But I just want to take a look now at the architecture here. Yep. Please be my guest. Open folder here as it is. Okay. So we got the app, the API components and quotes and all that kind of thing. And the store provider. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. And the store provider, which must be used on the layout, if I am exactly. So they wrap this on the store provider as it is, which makes a lot of sense. It makes a ton of sense. Okay. And here in the page they have Redux toolkit, that kind of thing. So yeah. All right. Okay. And then on leap is when they define is this slice for that. Interesting. They define is the store for this. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. As well as the router for this. The components, the quotes, which is another page here, and there you got it. Okay, so now that we take a look at the structure here, which is quite interesting, quite interesting. Features where they define is the quotes slice using TypeScript, exactly, base query, the reducer path, text types, endpoints, completely. Okay, similar for the counter, exactly, fetch count, counter slice, and they define this interface for that as well as the slice. Okay. All right. Okay. So now let me run this particularly example here. npm run def. Let's get into it. Okay. Let's get into it. Okay. This is part of the internal behavior here. Add an amount. Add async. Add if odd. And then now the navigation here to verify or to quote. that kind of thing. Now he's loading all of the quotes for that. That's quite interesting. That's very, 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 very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Okay. That's quite interesting, this demo. Okay. And there's a lot of there's a lot of pipeline here. Okay. Holy moly. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. That's interesting. Okay. So for that, we need to define is at the root level is the at the root level is the store provider, okay, and also define some libraries outside of that as a way to define is not only the global store, but also all of this particular slice. But all of this particular slice. And create app slice for that. As well as the hooks and stores. It's quite interesting. So you define your store, exactly combine slice, make store, totally. Now using is the configure store, which is come from Redux Toolkit. And all of this. Again, the entire reason of putting this in this particular format or is because, and here you go to dispatch is use app dispatch, use app selectors, and use app store. Exactly. Create app slice. And the whole point of putting this is because now you want to make your applications have full control of which particularly React components you want to be rendered on the client side because it contains JavaScript logic, or those who only the server will gonna render. So for example, static content, or to do this dynamic population there. Okay. Makes a ton of sense. And of course you need to now inject, you need to define is the store provider, and even is telling you, hey, this will be used on the client. You need to say, hey, I want you to now add that. Okay, let's going to create is the store for that, Optional but required for refetch on focus and refetch on reconnect behaviors. Okay. It's gonna make it simple here. Okay. It's gonna make it simple because at the end of the day, I just only want to fetch is data. Okay. I just only want to fetch is data. Okay, and the quote components. Exactly, and the quotes component. So this quote component is exactly what it is. Wait, what? For example, this quote component is actually the one who's gonna fetch data for that. Use get quotes query from quotes API slice as a way to get that data. Okay, and because now React Query exposed you nice little convenient features like data, is error, is loading, is success. Okay, now you can make use of them. If this is a success, okay, I want you to render all of this component. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Interesting. Okay. So it's in this component where you're gonna fetch the data. Are we? Question is, if I run this, how many HTTP requests are you doing? That's a good question. Okay. So, for example, here, follow me along right now. Okay, if I load in this, which is now already, okay, and then I navigate to this. Exactly, is fetching is this server response, fetching is the data from that. Okay, similar to this Webpack stuff here, which is the hot motor reload, a part of this chunk. Okay, code splitting, and then you got now here the quotes, where here you are actually is calling that. RTK Query. Exactly. Okay. Fetch server. Fetch server response. This is part of the Webpack, the model bundler. It's actually saying you is this necessary data as well as the available data relevant for that. Where now we are querying the data. All of these are from our servers, and this is the relevant one, the do me JSON. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting here, because now once we're able to look at how this is being done the Next.js way, all right, okay. So there's a couple of things that Next.js recommend to go with. That is, well, not only defining your store using TypeScript, okay, where you can combine slice, exactly. Not only define your store where you can combine slice, in our case, and it is interesting because they are defining is slice. Okay. They are defining is slice per route instead of having a global store. Let's move on, bro. Let's move on. Okay, the app router architecture and Redux. The primary new feature of Next.js App Router is the addition of support for React Server components, which is part of this experimental feature from React. React Server components are a special type of React components that only renders on the server, as opposed to client components that render on both, on the server initially, and then send that data to the client. The client now renders that with this particular data loaded, and then it will discard that to actually fetch and populate that with the relevant data and the interactivity on that. So on the client side, not only you render this once, but also you discard part of this as a way to provide now interactivity to this. That's part of the hydration process. Okay, all right. As opposed to client components that render on both the client and the server. RSC can be defined as async functions and return promise during rendering as they make async requests for data to render. So RSC can be defined as async functions and return promise during rendering as they make async requests for data to render. Okay, RSC can be defined async functions and return promise during rendering as they async request for data rendering. RSC's ability to block for data requests means that RSC's ability to block for data requests means that with the app router, you no longer have get server-side props to fetch data for rendering. Any component in the tree can make asynchronous request for data. Okay. So in this particular architecture, all right, now you are responsible for the server and the client. Any component here in the tree can make a synchronous request. Well, this is very convenient. It also means that you define global variables like Redux store. They will be shared across requests. This is a problem because the Redux store could be contaminated with data from other requests. Makes sense. Based on the architecture of the app router, because from this paragraph, we have now the ability, or we have now the approach to, before app router, we have a particular way to load data. Okay, but now here, what happened is that we now have this particular approach where now we can do as we want that in the past, letting up React components to load async data, but that is now But now this is similar to when we define is our Redux as a single store, or as a single DOM, right? The problem is because the Redux store could be contaminated with data from other requests. Based on the architecture on App Router, we have this general recommendation for appropriate use of Redux. No global store. Because of Redux store is shared across requests, is Redux store, not a slice. Again, this is part of the recommendation from there. Because the Redux store is shared across requests, you can have not only contaminated, but you can have also data that you don't need there. It should not be defined as global variable. Instead, the store should be created per request. Holy moly. RC React Server component should not read or write the Redux store. Makes sense, of course, because after all these React Server components, their entire goal is to render dynamic data that come from another server, okay? But they don't allow you to interactivity. These components is when you don't need to define any JavaScript code. Okay. RC cannot use hooks or context. They are meant to be stateful. Exactly. I don't care what it is when they say stateful here. Okay. They are meant to be stateful completely. They are meant to be stateful. Having an RC read or write values from global store violates the architecture of the Next.js App Router. Again, you can do that, but it's your choice. It's your pain. The store should only contain mutable data. We recommend that you use your Redux sparingly for data intended to be global and mutate sparingly. That's quite interesting. We recommend that you use Redux sparingly for data intended to be global and mutable. These recommendations are specific to applications written with the Next.js App Router. Exactly. Single-page applications don't execute on the server and therefore can define store as global variables. SPAs don't need to worry about RSC since they don't exist in single-page applications. And single store can store whatever data you want. So now this is the folder structure. Okay. Again, because they want to satisfy is now the server-side architecture. Okay. They want to satisfy is the server-side architecture. App layouts, and then you got the store provider. Here that you're going to inject is to the layout. I think it is. And then you're gonna see how that works. Okay. Remember that the whole point of this, okay, is because now this framework is giving you the options to decide which rendering mode you would like to go with your application. So for traditional client-side applications, it'll be good to say, all right, good. Now let's define as a global store, a global Redux store for that. And from there, you're going to consume data out of this. Makes sense, makes sense. For single page applications. But now for server-side rendering applications, okay, it's a no global stores, okay. Instead, stores should be created per request. So this is now a different approach. So stores should be created per request. React Server component should not read or write Redux store, because at the end of the day, they are meant to be stateful, okay? If you do that, that's violate is the architecture of Next App Router, and it'll be a painful experience, bro. Wouldn't recommend that. You're using now this tool. It's like it's like you're using a teacup instead of holding water to put it on your hat as a replacement as a to hat. Okay, you put that. I mean, you can. It'll be hard for you. So these recommendations are specific to applications written with Next.js App Router, single page applications. Exactly, specific to this particular architecture. Single page applications don't execute on the server and therefore can define store as a global variable. I think this is something important to mention, because if you're creating single page applications, this particular approach, discard it. Doesn't matter. But if you're going to go with us using the app router architecture instead of the old one, okay, the page router. If you're gonna follow along with us, okay, now this is the way to do this. Perfect. Single pages don't need to worry about RSC since they don't exist in the single page application, and single zones can store whatever that you want. Okay. Let's get into it. Folder structure. Next apps can be created to have /app folders, exactly, either at the root or nested under source app. Okay, your Redux logic should go in a separate folder along with the app folder. It is common to put Redux logics in a folder named lib, but not required. I go for the recommendation, bro. The file and folder structure inside of that lib folder is up to you, but we generally recommend a feature folder-based structure for the Redux logic. A typical example might look this. We'll use that approach for this guy. Okay, so because now Okay. So we'll use that approach for this guy. Initial setup. Similar to RTK TypeScript tutorial, we need to create a file for the Redux store as we'll infer root state and app dispatch type. However, Next multi-page architecture requires some difference from a single app setup. Creating the Redux store per request. Exactly. First, change is moved from define store as a global or model singleton variable. To define a mix, the first change is to move from defining store, which is configure store here, as a global or model singleton variable, to define a make store function that returns the new store for each request. Okay, so here we're now creating can you see what I'm looking right now? Not sure. Okay, that's right. Okay, so here we are creating is now a new store per request. Again, using the app router architecture. Okay. And this is on JavaScript. And then infer the type of make store. Export type app store, return type of make store. Okay. Infer the root states and app dispatch. Type from the store itself. Return app store and app store dispatch. Okay. Now we have a function make store that we can use to create a store instance per request while retaining the strong type safety if you choose to use TypeScript. that Redux Toolkit provide? Of course I'm gonna do that. We don't have a store variable export. Exactly. We now have is a factory function here. So anytime we call make store, it will create now a store per request. But we can infer the root state and dispatch type from the return type of make store. You will also want to create and export pre-typed version of the React Redux hooks as well. React Redux hooks as well. Okay, to simplify the use later. Okay. So we're going to also export this particularly hooks from React Redux that contains use dispatch, use selector, and use stores. So far so good. And if you remember, this is, well, how you can have access to this particular store. The use selector is how you can access to relevant data inside of the centralized data app level state or use store. The use dispatch is how you can now send an actions to perform that. And thanks to the React DevTool development kit, you can see how that works, how that changed along the way. Import type app dispatch. These are the types for your store. Okay. And then you want to export those types. Okay. Okay, app dispatch and app root state from your own store. Okay, per store. Per store. Okay. We use dispatch with types. Exactly. Use dispatch with type, use selector with types, and use store with types. And then now is when you're going to create the store, providing the store. Okay. Creating a Redux store per request. Providing the store. To use this new make store function, we need to create a new client component that will create the store and share it using the React Redux provider component. TypeScript and JavaScript. Okay, App Store provider.tsx. That makes a lot of sense. So this is use client here, import, provider, make store, app store. Okay, now we're going to create the provider here, providing the store to the React 3 component. Okay, use client, use ref. Interesting. Oh, we're going to inject that. This is an advanced hook. Provider. Okay, make store, app store. Okay, from the lib store, make store and app store. Here is when we are now providing this store. We say, hey, let's going to define this as a function. Okay, that it will take is the children. Exactly, that it'll take children's React components and it should return children's component completely. So we're gonna take is children React components, okay, which is React nodes, makes sense. We're gonna add some logic here. We're gonna say, hey, I want you to now add this store per request, okay, which is how exact store ref, use ref, okay, where now the data of this ref, this is a way to put a dynamic label to this. If you don't have any store, okay, create one. Okay, create one, and then you're going to return now that with the proper store and pass down the children's component that you want to render there. In this example code, we're ensuring that this client component is re-rendering safe by checking the value of the reference to ensure that the store is only created once. Exactly, you're making it a singleton here. This component will only be rendered once per request on the server, but might be re-rendered multiple times on the client. If there are stateful client components located above this component in the tree. If there are stateful client components located above this component in the tree, or if this component also contains other mutable states that cause a re-rendering. Okay. Again, in this example code, we're ensuring that this client is re-rendering safe by checking the value of a reference to ensure that a store is only created once. But this component will only be rendered once per request on the server, but might be rendered multiple times on the client if there are stateful client components located above. Why is that? Why you're gonna trigger re-render on the client side? Because, well, that's what, especially if you dispatch an actions, and if you have this global state, of course you're gonna re-render that. But here you are creating is create a store instance the first time this render, and again this will be rendered. Okay, the first time is render. Why client components? Any component that interact with Redux stores, or any component that interact with JavaScript code, it needs to be a client component. This is because accessing the store requires React context, and context is only available in client components. And it's because you need JavaScript as we have. Anytime you need client side anytime you need client side code, window object, that kind of thing, React, DOM, Redux, they're going to now require you to do this. You need to put a table on Next. The next step is to include the store provider anywhere in the tree above where the store is used. You can locate the store in the layout component if all routes using the layout need the store, or if the store is only using a specific route. You can create up and provide the store in that route handler. In all client components further down the tree, you can use store exactly as you will. Or if the store is only used in a specific route, you can create and provide a store in that route handler. Wait a moment. You can locate the store in the layout component if all the routes using the layout needs to store. You can locate the store in the layout component if all the route using that layout needs a store, or if the store only using in a specific route. Okay. Again, you can have much more fine control about when you want to import this particular store at the router level or at the requests. In all client components further down the tree, you can use the store exactly as you will normally use seeing the hooks provided by React Redux. And then loading initial data. If you need to initialize the store with data from the pattern component, then define the data as props on the client store provider. Okay. If I need to initialize data components and use Redux actions on the slice to set data in the store as shown below. Oh, if you need to, okay, if you need to initialize the store with data from parent component. Initialize count. Where yes, that's exactly what we want to do. Exactly. We want is to initially dispatch a data or load initial data. Okay. So store the current dispatch with the action. Okay. And additional configurations. Per route state, if you use Next.js support for client single page style navigation by using Next navigation, then when customer navigate from page to page, only route components will be rendered. This means that if you have a Redux store created and providing the layout component, it will be preserved across route change. This is not a problem if you're initialize the store with the product information. Exactly, you dispatch that and initialize the current true. This is at per route state. This is per route state. And the other is catching. App router has 4 separate catch, includes fetch, request, and route catches. The most likely catch to cause uses is the route catch. If you have an application that has set logging, you may have routes, home routes, that render different database on the user. You will need to disable the route catch by using the dynamic export from route handler. After a mutation, you should also invalidate the catch by calling revalidate path and revalidate tag. RTK Query. We recommend using RTK Query for data fetching on the client only. Data fetching on the server should use fetch request from async RTK React server component. You can learn more about React toolkits in the Redux toolkit tutorial, something that I'm quite familiar with. And there you got it. Checking your work. There are 3 key areas that you should check to ensure that you have set up Redux toolkit correctly. Server-side rendering. Check the HTML output of the server to ensure that the data in the Redux store is present in the server-side rendering output. Route change. Navigate between pages on the same route as well between different routes to ensure the route's specific data is initialized properly. And mutations. Check that the store is compatible with Next.js App Router catches by performing a mutation and then navigating away from the route and back on the original route to ensure the data is updated. An overall recommendation: only use Redux for globally shared mutable data. Okay, overall recommendation. The App Router presents a dramatically different architecture for React applications from either the page router or a single page application completely. We recommend rethinking your approach to state management in the light of this new architecture. In single page applications, it is not usual to have a large store that contains all the data, something that I'm quite familiar. Both mutable and immutable requires to drive the application. For App Router application, we recommend that you should only use Redux for globally shared mutable data and use a combination of Next.js state, search pattern, row pattern, and form state, etc., React context, and React hooks for all other state management. All right. This is the Next.js app architecture way. Yeah, let's get it, dude. Not only this Redux logic pattern, not only this, but the other is next data fetching. In data fetching, depending on your application use case, this includes pre-rendering with server-side rendering or static generation, and updating or creating content at runtime. And updating and creating content at runtime with incremental static regeneration. On the libs, they define is the API here. Fetch API query here. Okay, they define all of this. Okay, makes sense. They define all of these things as it is. Okay, API here, constant, and then markdown to HTML. Okay, with all of your endpoints here. So this is not the Next.js way to define that. Fetch API, they're using is GraphQL for this. Interesting. This fetch API wrapper from that. No? Oh, they're passing as a query? That's the variable. And they're using is fetch. Okay. Thanks for fetch to exist, Jesus. This vacay function. Okay. And then on the page is when they have this. Exactly. The entry point for this. But this is the old way. Exactly. This is the old way of doing this. Navigation on the router here. And get static props. You're gonna read all of the data as it is. Okay. So this is their particular way of doing that, which is similar to Next, you know. In my particular case, client-side data fetching with use effects. In my particular case, and for this demo, okay, yeah, in my particular case and for this demo, state while revalidate. Oh, stay while revalidate. So it can catch the data and revalidate the data. It becomes stale. Stale while revalidate. Stale while revalidate. Exactly. Because I can now catching automatically the data, okay, and then going to revalidate the data. It becomes stale. Stale while revalidate. So I'm not only going to catch the data here, but in the meantime, exactly, I'm not only going to catch the data here, but in the meantime, I also going to I'm not only going to catch the data, but also I'm going to revalidate the data. It becomes stale. These are particularly hooks they have. And it should be catch invalidation strategy popularized by this. It should be catch control extension from stale content. Damn son. From Yahoo. God damn. And they explain this is the mechanism. Stale while revalidate. Delta second. This document defines two independent HTTP catch control extensions that allow control over use of stale response by catches. This document is not an internet standard track specification. If it is published for informational purpose. So this is part of the standard, bro, or this release for candidate. Independent submission. What is the status of this? This RFC was published on the independent submission string. This RFC is not endorsed by the EATF and has no formal standing. It has no formal standing on this EFTF standard protocol. Engineering EATF, yeah. What the fuck is EATF? Internet Engineering Task Force. Okay, it's a military command. Status to verify. That's quite interesting. Revisions 3. Last updated 2020, 21. Oh my god. That's quite freaking interesting. And then you got is this. Okay. So these people actually are looking for these protocols or this internet engineering, totally. Internet engineering task force. Oh my god. Okay. That's going that's go deep into the rabbit hole. We don't want to do that. This is good that this exists. Okay. That's quite interesting. It handles catching, revalidation, focus, tracking, refetching, or intervals. Catching, revalidation, focus tracking, refetching on intervals, and more. Cleanup stage. Okay. Why am I doing this with Redux? Because a lot of company out there, they invest all of their energy in that, because Redux was this popular tool that allowed us to control is the app level state, okay, for client-side navigation. So now here it says great, good, but if you want to now bring here the server-side rendering components, we need to actually rethink in the way how we're gonna do this. And there is a lot of components. There is a lot of and there's a lot of people out. Okay, and there's a lot of company out there that have extensively used Redux for that, and that makes a lot of sense. And that makes a ton of sense. Okay. So whether we use is the stale while revalidate, okay, which I think it'll be much more easy to work with. Stale while revalidate that. Backend agnostic, server-side rendering and static site generation ready, TypeScript ready, remote and local. The key string and the fetcher function. Okay. It's created by the same team behind the Next.js, the React framework, follow version. And it was using React Native. Stale while revalidating. I'll prefer to go with boring. I mean, great, because this looked like pretty much like React Query. Okay, for example, like this looked like pretty much like React Query. Okay, from 10 stack. What you provide is now here's a URL, here's a key, here's a refetch method. That's it. Exactly. Yeah, pretty much like this. No, pretty much like this. And now this has been used by de facto. As a way to fetch data here. As a way to fetch data here. Okay. So far we have several implementation of how can we fetch data in our applications. Okay. So we can use this React query like this. Which is pretty much actually powerful the way you can do this. All right. Another interesting thing is that Next.js with React, with React Query, using Next.js, the exact implementation of this mechanism may vary from platform to platform, but we recommend starting the Next.js, which is supported with 2 forms of pre-rendering. Static generation and server-side rendering. React Query supports both of these forms of pre-rendering regardless of what platform you may be using. Note, for notes about how you integrate with /app folder, see further down in this guide. Okay, you can go with using initial data together with Next.js, get static prop or get server-side props. You can pass the data you fetch is either method to use query and initial data option. Oh, okay. Using the app directory in Next.js 13. This one. Both prefetching approach using initial data or hydrates are available in the app directory. Prefetching the data in the server components and props drill initial data to client component. Quick set of the simple cases may need to prop drill through multiple layers of clients. Okay, prefetch the data in the server component and props drill initial data to the client components, or prefetch the query on the server, dehydrate the cache, and rehydrate it in on the client with hydrate. Requires slightly more setup upfront. No need to prop drill. Query fetching is based on when the query was prefetched on the server. Okay. Query client provider is required for both initial data and hydrate prefetching approach. Both prefetching approaches using initial data or hydrates are available. But one of the things is prefetch the data in server components and props drill initial data to client components. And the other is prefetch the query on the server, prefetch the data in the server component and props drill initial data to client components. And the other is to prefetch the query on the server, dehydrate the cache, rehydrate it on the client with hydrated. Query client is required for both initial data and hydrate prefetching. The hooks provided by React Query package needs to retrieve a query client. Okay, the hooks provided by React Query package needs to retrieve a query client from their context. Wrap your component tree with query client provider and passes as an instance to the query client, which is kind of the thing here. So the idea here is to say, hey, this component that I created, this provider that I'm going to get as children's React nodes, I'm going to then define is the layer, define some logic here as a way to say, hey, I want to now enable is the hooks, okay? Which means is that I want you to know any times when I fetching data, I want you to re-render this component. For example, here, new query client, okay? So as a way to now have all of the mechanism and logic attached to this provider, and then I want you to return this query client provider with all of the props that it received, with all of the React nodes that it received, which I'm going to pass down do that. And then on the layouts is when you say this one. Actually, this is quite interesting. Okay, but query client provider is required for both initial data and hide rotate. So you got here, you using initial data and then using hide rotate. Makes sense. Okay, using the initial data, exactly. You define is okay, fetch initial data in the server component. That's interesting. Higher up in the component tree and passes to your client component. Exactly, and passes to your client component as a props. Okay. And on the post, this is when you're gonna get that props and pass that as the initial data, which is prop.post. Query key, query functions, and initial data. And then using hide rotate, create a request scope singleton instance of the query client. Okay. Create a request second singleton instance of query client. This ensures the data is not shared between different users and requests. We'll still only creating the query client once per request. Yeah, this ensures that data is not shared between different users and requests. Okay, while still only creating the query client once per request. We'll still only creating the query client once per request. Okay. You say, hey, I want you to catch now. Okay, I want you to now catch this app.getQueryClient GSX or TSX. I want you to now query this per client. Fetch your data in the server component. And this is using hide rotate, using initial data and using hide rotate. Okay, using initial data. Okay, and using hide rotate. Where here you say, hey, let me now export this, which require a little bit of setup with hide rotate, slightly more setup, because now you're saying, hey, each one of these requests, I want you to catch that. Okay, React, I want you to catch this. Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So hey React, I want you to, all of these users that I connect into my server, catch that. Okay, store that. We're still only creating query clients once per request. Fetch your data in the server component higher up in the component tree than the client component that use the prefetch queries. Yeah, fetch your data in the server components higher up in the component tree. In the component tree than the client components that use the prefetch queries. Your prefetch query will be available to all components deeper down to the component tree. Retrieve the query client singleton instance. Okay. Fetch your data in the server component higher up in the component tree that the client that use prefetch queries. Your prefetch query will be available to all components deeper down the component tree. I don't get it this. Fetch your data in the server component. Exactly. Fetch your data, but in the server components higher up in the component tree that the client components that use prefetch query. So it's like you're gonna fetch the data in. Oh, okay. It's like you're gonna fetch the data. Jesus, you're gonna fetch the data higher up on the tree. Okay. You're gonna fetch you're gonna fetch your data in the server components, higher up in the component tree that the client component they use to prefetch query. Your prefetch query will be available to all components deeper down to the component tree. Oh, okay. Retrieve the query client singleton instance. Okay, get me this single instance from the query client that was created here. Okay. Prefetch the data using the client prefetch query methods and wait for it to complete. Okay. Prefetch query method. Use dehydrate to obtain a dehydrate state of the prefetch query from the query cache. Wrap the component tree that needs the prefetch query inside of dehydrate and provide it with dehydrate state. You can fetch inside multiple server components and use hydrate in multiple places. You can fetch inside multiple server components and use hydrate in multiple places. If you encounter a type error while using async server component with TypeScript versions lower than 5.1.3 and type React versions lower than 18.2.0, it is recommended to update the latest version of both. Alternatively, you can use a temporary workaround of TypeScript expect error server component when calling this component inside another. For more information, see async components TypeScript error in Next.js 13 docs. This is on the app level. Hydrate post GSX. So get me the query client from that instance, okay? And here's where I'm going to hydrate the post, which means that client prefetch query, okay, it's on the server. I'm going to now perform that, okay? Okay. So behind the scenes, what you're doing is just waiting for that data to be loaded, okay? And then by dehydrate, now you have is the proper state for that. So in your post, during server rendering, calls to use query nested with hydrate, client component will have access to prefetch data providing the state property. So on the post, by using the use query here, okay. So when you send that, now this on the client side say, hey, I got this instance that is per this user, so you can have access to that. This use query could just as well happen in some deeper childs to hydrate post component. Exactly. Because after all, it will pass down that. Data will be available immediately either way. Data will be available immediately either way. The query was not prefetched on the server and will not start fetching until on the client. Both patterns are fine to mix. Holy moly. As demonstrated, it is fine to prefetch some queries and lets other exactly query key and query function. As demonstrated, it is fine to prefetch some queries and let others fetch on the client. This means you can control what contents server renders and not by adding or removing prefetch query. For a specific query, streaming, suspend, and server-side fetching. Okay. Again, so far there are two particular approaches, especially when it comes to fetch data with server-side rendering applications using Next. Whether it's going with Redux, which is something that you're likely to go with. A lot of companies are using Redux, so it makes sense to go with this. Or the other that has now embraced by the community, which is React Query, which is a lot of less boilerplates. Totally, it's a lot of less boilerplates, but it comes with new complexity here. The idea here is that once you understand how do we get here, especially with React, why React exists, which is only for rendering components, and then from there come up with new challenge that is, hey, how can we now organize our components in a way that allows to build web applications, okay? And then how can we now is manage app level state on the client side, and then now how can we do this server-side rendering, which is something that we did with PHP or Ruby, okay, as a way to now, for example, any marketing page or any web app or page that needs to get indexed for any search engine crawler, we need to do this server-side rendering. Okay. What is your approach? For this, I'm gonna use is the React Query, something that I'm quite familiar with, and it's also more straightforward. Because with Next, you have to do a lot of these boilerplates, which so far there's nothing wrong with that. But the less code, the better. That's all. For companies, Redux, it'll be the way to go. Redux will be the way to go. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Data fetching. Okay, data fetching Redux, data fetching in React Query. Okay. So based on this protocol, because too many options is not healthy. Too many options, not healthy. Too many options, not healthy, bro. Okay. Okay. Data fetching mechanism. Evaluate data fetching mechanism. It's just like that. It's just like that. It's just like that. It's just like that. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.